500 didn't feel fast. It felt wrong. The kind of wrong that makes your hands shake on the gate. The kind of wrong that turns confidence into doubt halfway through a moto. You didn't ride a 500. You negotiated with it. And for nearly 2 decades, that negotiation sat at the top of motocross. Pros learned to manage it. Weekend riders learned the hard way. A lot of people realized they'd bought more bike than they could handle. And then the entire class disappeared. Not because it stopped working, because the sport moved on, and the 500 didn't belong in what came next. The 500 wasn't excess, it was an answer. In the late 70s and 80s, motocross wasn't built around tight stadium rhythms or perfectly sculpted jump faces. Tracks were huge, fast, rough. Long motos on wide open terrain where momentum mattered more than finesse. Bikes sank into loam, clawed up hills, and got swallowed by braking bumps that never really reset. To survive that environment, you didn't need finesse. You needed torque. You needed power that didn't ask permission. Displacement was the solution. A 500cc two-stroke could pull tall gearing through soft soil, stretch straights into weapons, and carry speed where smaller bikes simply ran out of breath. When the track opened up, the 500 made sense. It didn't need to be revved to death. You pointed it, committed, and let the engine do the work.
And if Gabors can win this race and Thorpe stays second here, pull back 3 championship points, the gap will then be down to 9. Side by side over the jump, and Thorpe's got past Gabors. They lock handlebars as they go through, but Thorpe's done it. Thorpe now leads, least third.
If you were brave enough to stay on it. And at the professional level, it worked. The fastest riders in the world weren't trying to tame the bike. They were using it like a tool. Short shifting, letting the torque flatten rough sections, conserving energy over brutal motos. The bike rewarded restraint, not aggression. But here's the catch. That logic only held up at the top. The same qualities that made the 500 effective on big tracks made it hostile everywhere else. The power didn't scale down. The learning curve didn't soften. What worked for elite riders on national tracks became a liability the moment conditions tightened, fatigue set in, or judgment slipped. Still, the class existed because motocross itself demanded it, at least for a while. The sport outgrew the bike long before the bike changed. You don't remember the numbers. You remember how they felt. The CR500, the KX500, the YZ490, Maico. These bikes weren't defined by horsepower charts or geometry tables. They were defined by stories, usually told with wide eyes and a pause before the punchline. The power bands were explosive, not progressive. One moment, the bike felt asleep. The next, it was trying to rip your arms off. The exhaust note wasn't a high scream like smaller bikes. It was a deep, heavy crack that you felt in your chest before you processed it. When it came on the pipe, it didn't climb. It detonated. Throttle control wasn't a skill, it was a survival mechanism. Too much input didn't spin the tire, it lit the fuse. And once it came on, there was no dialing it back mid-mistake. Brakes lagged behind the engines. Frames flexed in ways riders felt but couldn't fix. Suspension technology hadn't caught up to the force coming out of the cylinder. The faster you went, the more the bike demanded perfect timing, because it wouldn't forgive being late. In a straight line, they were unbeatable. Everywhere else, they were a negotiation. Even getting one started felt like part of that negotiation. You didn't casually stab at the Kickstarter. You found top dead center. You committed. And if you were lazy, the lever snapped back hard enough to remind you who was in charge.
Jumps out really evidently for me is the Honda's got more torque, pulling a high gear, but it's so flexy. The frame, the suspension's soft, everything's like an armchair. So very torquey bike, has to use the gears, likes 4th gear, but just wallows everywhere. Turns quite nice. Kawasaki straight away felt taller, as it looks really, bigger bike, taller bike, a lot firmer even in the frame, a lot less flex. Which was great over the jumps, felt really nice over the jumps. Very broad power, very smooth, didn't really need much force, could leave it in third and let it run. So straight away, some really big differences there from the off.
This is a machine that doesn't try to make you happy. It forces you to grow up. It rewards timing, respect, and a steady right wrist. And it punishes daydreaming. No, the YZ490 isn't perfect. It was never meant to be. But in the 1980s, it became a definition, a certain kind of rider, a certain kind of grit, and a certain kind of American motocross confidence, when easy wasn't the point.
Corners became trust exercises. Whoops were a coin flip. Jump faces felt longer because backing out wasn't an option. If you hesitated, the bike punished you. If you overcommitted, it punished you harder. The machine didn't meet you halfway. It waited for you to catch up. Each brand had its flavor of personality. Some hit earlier, some pulled longer, some scared you right away. Others lulled you into confidence before snapping. But none of them felt reasonable. The Honda CR500 had a reputation for hitting like it was personally offended. The power didn't build politely. It arrived. Riders talked about the mid-range like it had a switch hidden somewhere in the throttle. In open desert or long sand washes, it felt unstoppable. On tighter terrain, it could feel like it was waiting for you to make one mistake. The Kawasaki KX500 was different. It didn't spike as abruptly. It just pulled, heavy, endless torque that felt like it would drag the earth with it. In dunes and wide-fire roads, it wasn't dramatic. It was relentless. The kind of power that made smaller bikes feel like they were revving just to stay in the picture. The Yamaha YZ490 carried its own reputation. Stubborn, mechanical, a little raw, even by 500 standards. Starting rituals, carb tuning stories. When it was dialed, it was massive. When it wasn't, it reminded you quickly that owning a 500 wasn't always convenient. And then there was Maico, the cult favorite. European, smoother, almost refined compared to the Japanese bikes. For some riders, it felt more balanced. For others, it was simply proof that even the smooth 500 was still a 500. Fast, physical, relentless. No spec sheet captured any of that. The numbers didn't explain why one rider swore by red, another by green, another by blue. The differences weren't just horsepower curves, they were personality traits. And whichever one you chose, you were choosing how you wanted to learn the hard way. They were fast in ways that felt irresponsible. They were powerful in ways that felt personal. And once you'd ridden one, you didn't argue about which was best. You just argued about which one scared you the most. On a 500, bravery got you in trouble. Restraint kept you on the bike. Anyone could twist the throttle. The riders who survived and won were the ones who understood that the bike didn't need help being fast. It needed you to not make it worse. That's why Jeff Ward stands out as the control example. Ward didn't look like he was fighting the motorcycle. It looked like he was managing it, placing the front wheel, keeping the chassis calm, letting the torque do the work without waking up the chaos.
Dude, who is this kid? He could ride a good bike very fast. He could ride a poor bike as fast as it could be ridden.
God, he could win on anything. He was tougher than a $2 steak.
For a little guy, he was a real strong son of a gun.
He was like royalty.
On a 500, that kind of composure wasn't style points. It was the difference between finishing a moto and getting thrown into the fencing. Now contrast that with riders who carried more edge to the limit. Rick Johnson had speed that looked aggressive, even when it wasn't. He could attack, but the 500 made over-aggression expensive. So, the great ones learned when to let the bike run and when to shut it down, especially late in motos when late race tension turned tiny mistakes into big ones.
Johnson on the inside, he's stalking him, he's going, he's got him! Johnson, a beautiful pass on the inside. Tishner did not expect that pass, and now it's Ronnie's turn to take a riding lesson from Ricky Johnson.
David Bailey was finesse and precision in an era that tried to overwhelm you. When you watch those guys, it's not domination you remember, it's discipline. The ability to ride a machine that wanted to explode without letting it change your posture, your timing, or your decision making.
I think style.
He's always very smooth and very perfect.
Smooth riding style.
A lot of confidence in himself and his riding ability.
Well, he's just got a really smooth style, and I guess you'd just consider him the master motocross.
And then there were riders like Ron Lachine, who felt like the human version of the bike. Raw, intense, always riding close to the edge where the 500 lived. Not as a villain, not as a punchline, just as proof that the machine attracted a certain type of racer.
Lachine, he's seen no other rider for so long, he probably thinks the meeting's been abandoned. Lachine has had his share and more of controversy in his youthful career, but that's all behind him now as he stamps his authority on this heat. Lachine supreme.
The kind willing to risk it all for the lap that mattered. But the 500 didn't reward risk. It amplified it. The harder you charged, the more the bike demanded precision back. Push too far and it didn't fade, it snapped. Get greedy late in a moto and fatigue turned confidence into chaos. On a 500, commitment wasn't the separator. Control under fatigue was. Because the bike didn't just measure how fast you could go when everything felt good. It measured what happened when your arms were pumped, your timing was late, and the power was still there, whether you were ready for it or not. At that level, that's what separated riders. Not bravery, not aggression, but the ability to manage violence without letting it manage you. Here's where the legend becomes a warning label, because the 500 wasn't only a pro weapon, it was a showroom option. And a lot of normal riders bought one the way people buy a muscle car, because the number sounded powerful and the fantasy felt good for about 10 minutes. Then the gate dropped at a local track, and reality showed up. Most local tracks weren't built for 500s. Tight corners, short straights, jump faces that demanded precision, not brute force. On a 250, you could get away with mistakes. On a 500, mistakes escalated fast. The bike would yank you forward when you were already on edge, stand up in ruts when you needed it to settle, and turn sloppy throttle into wheel spin that felt like betrayal. It didn't take long before it started taking something back. 1 lap in, and your forearms were swelling. 2 laps in, and your breathing turned ragged. 3 laps in, and you weren't attacking the track anymore. You were bracing for it.
And Jeff Ward, no, Ward goes down! O'Mara goes down! And out in front is David Bailey. Oh, Hanna almost goes down! He's in front! Bob Hanna physically through the battle for third. Brock Glover, number 6, the cool calculating goal.
It didn't care that you had a 9 to 5. It didn't care that you hadn't ridden in a month. It didn't care that you were pretty fast on a 125. And that's when it got dangerous. 1 whiskey throttle out of a rut didn't bog. It surged. Your arms locked, the bars went light, and suddenly you weren't steering anymore. You were reacting. Try to grab the clutch with forearms that felt like concrete, and it might as well have been welded in place. The power didn't taper off while you figured it out. It kept coming. The 500 demanded pro-level inputs from amateur bodies. That's why so many of these bikes became weekend-long romances. People would buy them, ride them once, learn the hard way, then quietly list them for sale like they were moving on from a bad relationship. Things like, runs great, too much bike for me, or needs a new home. The myth explodes here because it reveals the real truth. The 500 wasn't a flex. It was a filter. It separated riders who could manage torque from riders who just wanted to feel it. And when the bike is powerful enough to check ego, it doesn't take long before the ego stops buying it. Even when the 500 stopped making sense on tracks, it still made sense somewhere else. Sand pits, fire roads, open desert, wide beaches if you had them, anywhere the horizon was far enough away that the bike could finally breathe. That's where the 500 became what it always wanted to be, a straight-line animal with room to run. No tight rhythm sections, no jump faces forcing you to chop the throttle, just throttle travel and open space, where the torque wasn't a liability. It was the whole point.
Speed's gonna be, we're gonna start right when we hit that black line. 3, 2, 1, go. 30, 40, 50, May, boys. 84 miles per hour.
And that's also where the culture around the 500 really grew, because the 500 became a story bike. It's not, I used to race one for years. It's almost always, I rode one once. One day, one weekend, one borrowed rip in the sand that left your arms cooked and your memory burned in. People bench race the 500 like a near-death experience they're proud to have survived. You'll hear the same phrases over and over. It hit so hard, I couldn't keep the front down. I sold it immediately. I miss it, but I don't. The 500's legend got bigger after the checkered flag because outside racing, it didn't have to prove anything with results. It only had to prove what it did to you. The bike wasn't measured in lap times anymore. It was measured in adrenaline and respect. And, ironically, that's what kept it alive. Even as the class faded, the 500 stayed in garages like a trophy and a threat at the same time. A machine you take out to remind yourself what raw really means. A bike you don't ride to improve. You ride it to feel the edge. Because that's what the 500 gave people. Not progression, but perspective. The 500 didn't die because riders got soft. It died because motocross moved on. Track design changed first. They got tighter, jumpier, more technical. Supercross influence bled into everything. Short straights, sharper corners, timing sections that rewarded precision over brute force. The 500 was built for open terrain and long motos. As the sport became more stop-start and more rhythm-based, the 500's biggest strength, brutal torque, started showing up as a disadvantage. Then came the four-stroke era, and it wasn't a betrayal. It was economics meeting reality. Four-strokes brought broader power, easier traction, and a learning curve that didn't try to eject you for one bad twitch.
You had to be really on point in two-stroke days, but it also taught you how to carry momentum. With the bikes being a bit lighter and more nimble, you could rail turns harder.
And the general consensus was, well, it's heavier and it's got more moving parts and all this, and that's why this bike needs more CCs to be competitive in the same class as a two-stroke. The professional racing teams and riders, they switched to the four-stroke because the bottom line is there's no replacement for displacement.
By 2004, the tides had shifted.
So then that year, every manufacturer could race a four-stroke, and of course everybody jumped on board. And the two-strokes were sort of, believe it or not, sort of maxed out.
Competing on a two-stroke seemed impossible. The four-strokes were easier to ride, made more power, and the added weight was negligible.
By 03, 04, if you were still on a 125, you were bringing a spork to a gunfight. You know, it wasn't even a knife.
They were more manageable for more riders, which matters when the industry isn't only selling to pros, it's selling to everyone who wants to ride on a Saturday. And once the consumer base began choosing bikes that let them ride longer with less punishment, the market made the decision for the sport. Safety played a role too, even if nobody wanted to say it out loud. The 500 demanded perfection at high speed. Modern racing demanded endurance across a season. When bikes got faster overall, the question wasn't who can handle the most power. It became who can survive the most races. And the 500's margin for error didn't fit that direction. So the class faded quietly, not with a funeral, but with fewer bikes on the line, fewer riders choosing them, and fewer reasons for manufacturers to keep developing a machine that most customers couldn't fully use. The 500 wasn't pushed out by one thing. It was pushed out by the sport's evolution, tracks, technology, money, and the simple truth that motocross, at scale, can't revolve around a bike that overwhelms the majority of people who buy it. Modern bikes are faster than ever, but they don't feel like a 500, because speed today comes with buffers, electronics, chassis balance, suspension that actually keeps up, power delivery designed to be usable instead of violent. Even a fast, modern 450 feels like it's trying to help you recover when you're late. It gives you time, it gives you traction, it gives you a second chance. The 500 didn't. That's why it won't come back. Not because it can't, but because it shouldn't. A modern 500 would either be neutered into something that isn't a 500, or it would be exactly what it used to be, and the market would reject it all over again. most riders don't want a machine that amplifies small mistakes with big consequences. Not when tracks are tighter, weekends are shorter, and the average rider is balancing work, family, and a body that doesn't heal like it used to. And that's the uncomfortable part. The 500 didn't make motocross better. It made it honest. It showed you exactly where your limit was, and it showed it fast. No excuses, no, I was off today, no, I'll get to it next weekend. If your technique was sloppy, it got exposed. If your fitness was weak, it fell apart. If your confidence was fake, it got corrected. That's why the legend lives, not because it was the best bike, because it was the most truthful bike.
Gave you something simple and brutally durable, and in return, it demands you know how to set it up, live with it, and respect it. This is where the YZ465 stops being just metal and math and starts feeling like a character. It says the bike wasn't only a brute, it was a tool that could win at the highest level when the rider was sharp enough to use it, not just hang on to it. And here's the money truth that explains why the legend never died. In 1991, Cycle World looked back and noted Yamaha sold thousands of YZ465s from 1982 through 1990, and that a huge slice of them went to trail riders, people who wanted that air-cooled, no radiators, no-nonsense simplicity, and didn't care if it was fashionable. So yeah, this is a bike that got criticized. It always did. But it also won when a truly great rider showed what it could be. And that's how machines become myths.
The sport doesn't build bikes like that anymore because the sport doesn't need to. Progress isn't just speed, it's accessibility. It's keeping more riders on bikes longer. It's making performance something you can learn without paying for it in concussions and hospital bills. But there's a cost to that comfort. The 500 gave you fear and respect in the same breath. Modern bikes give you speed with less fear, and that's objectively better, even if it's less romantic. The 500cc two-stroke wasn't the golden era. It was the era where the bike made the rules. Just torque, vibration, and a power band that didn't negotiate. On the right track, in the right hands, it was unreal. But for most people, it was a lesson you learned once, then remembered forever. And that's why it still lives in the culture. So here's the question, and don't lie. Did you ever ride a 500? Or were you smart enough not to? Drop your best 500 story below. First ride, worst crash, biggest scare, or the day you sold it after one weekend. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay wicked.